you very much. I need to say good afternoon, ladies and gents. So I'm very happy to see that security that we're going to discuss today is not something that's only for this women event, but it's, I think, something that has almost become a word that you interject in everyday conversation. It's breakfast security, lunch security, evening security, and oh my goodness, the cyber criminals have hit me again over the weekend, security. So without further ado, I'm going to share my slides, and please, I ask you, whilst I am presenting, pose questions, raise your hand. Eva will have a look when you do raise your hand. If there's a pressing question that you want to ask, you're welcome to stop me. The chat today is not an academic one. This is based on my personal experience that I've had, and during the course of the slides, I'll also just tell you a little bit more about my career when it comes to security. Let me just share there. Eva, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. So today we're going to talk about physical and logical security, or what I call the kicking down the doors and catching the cyber criminal security, and how this type of security should actually, in the days that we find ourselves in, be discussed under one topic, and that being security concerns. Now, as I promised you a little bit about myself, I have a law degree. I'm also a CFE. I held the designation of FPSA as well. I have done my CISSP course, and yes, I need to go and write the exam, I know. And so for me, when I talk from a background of not only law, but also of security. And where I think I've got the most experience at this stage is in the world of cybersecurity, and of course the investigations and prosecutions of cyber-related offenses. My career started doing a little bit of articles with an attorney firm. I then realized that I was made to put criminals behind bars. I joined the National Prosecuting Authority, District Court, Regional Court. I was with the DPP's office in Pretoria. I was then in Johannesburg. I was a deputy director in the Scorpions in Durban. And then for a number of years after that, I was the strategic and legal advisor to the head of the Scorpions. From there, I did 6 years as head of forensics for Cell C. And also during that time, I looked after information security up until the stage that they appointed a permanent person. Currently, I do have my own consulting firm. I do a lot of training on issues such as the cyber legislation. I do cyber risk assessments, high-level cybersecurity risk assessments, forensic investigations, and sometimes I also do a bit of gardening. So without further ado, I just want to collapse this. Thank you very much. There we go. I'm going to look at firstly, our modern work environment, and then just looking at what we traditionally find under the concepts of physical and logical security. Then the terms that you will usually find more in the cybersecurity environment, but if any of you have dealt with a threat before, these concepts of protect, detect, react, respond, remediate, report would not be foreign to you, because I do think that to a great extent, although these steps are traditionally found within the cybersecurity space, it is something that we implement in both what I call real world security as well as in the cybersecurity space. And I'm going to use two practical examples to demonstrate the benefit that the integration or a convergence of these two disciplines can have. We're going to look at the concept of access management and then the concept of investigating a breach, be it a cyber criminal matter, be it a data breach, or whatever. Those principles are the same. And then in closing, I'm going to talk a little bit about how this is still all about managing risk. and of course the measures that we put in place to mitigate that risk. Can you think of any scenario these days, and even more so in these times that we find ourselves in, where we're working from home and we're reliant on ICT for everything that we do? ICT, and by ICT I mean the information and communications technology structures. It's my phone, it's my computer, it's my toaster, it's my washing machine, and these days even my car. So ICT permeates through every area of our lives. And through our lives, I don't only mean our work environment, I also mean our personal environment. And if we think about security, we need to think about security not only as a concept that we find within our work environment, but also something that we have to apply to our own personal space. Now, the knowledge of cybersecurity, for those of you that conduct investigations, this is something that I cover extensively in the training that I present. If I understand the basics of cybersecurity, and specifically when we talk about terms such as confidentiality, integrity, and availability, as well as the concepts that we apply to protect what we call the CIA triangle, if we understand that, we find ourselves in the position that we might even have other sources of whodunit evidence when it comes to the investigation of, for example, a breach. Say, for example, that breach is somebody gained access to your systems and they went and deployed ransomware. Now, if you understand access management and you understand how systems are structured, I'm going to look at physical access. For example, did this person that the IP address is assigned to enter my premise? Was there video footage? At the stage when this person's worktop or desktop was used, was the person actually physically sitting behind it? We would know about traffic data. We would know about access logs, the same way that we use access logs in our physical environment. There is also access logs created within our logical or our cyber environment. Now, there's definitely a need for an integration or a conversion of physical and logical security. And not only the terms that we find, that this is somebody from the security office and this is somebody from the IT office. The integration or convergence of these two disciplines go further than just a structure that I put there to say that both those functions need to report to the same point. At the least, it means that our organization that we work for, or our work environment, which is now at home, we need to understand that we need to integrate these two functions to effectively address security. And security these days is probably one of the most important concepts that we have. And I think in South Africa, we have a bit of a benefit through experience that we know how serious security breaches can be. Daily, we have break-ins at our houses. We've got armed robberies. We've got break-ins at our stores. We've got hijackings. These days, ransomware is a daily occurrence in South Africa. That is, if it is reported. But we've also found that that integration is necessary when it comes to our home environment, because basically our home environment has now become our work environment. Here I'm sitting in my house giving a presentation to you, but we're all on the clock. This is our work day. And have I given thought to the fact that bringing my work home, besides causing a lot of ruckus if you bring your work life home, but we've been forced to make our house our office. Has that exposed our houses, our personal space, to additional risks? Or have we exposed our work environment to other risks because we are now working from home? Do I, for example, employ the same type of security measures when I connect from my home to my computer network at the office? Do I know that my traffic is secured here? This wonderful up fiber line that I have I secured it the same way? Am I using it the same way as I would use this type of infrastructure when I am working from the office? Now, planning for a security event, I don't have to convince you of the importance. And this is also very important when it comes to the cybersecurity environment. This is something that has again been highlighted now with the advent of the implementation of the POPIA legislation, and definitely also by some of the provisions in the cybercrimes bill. That bill is about to be signed into law by the president. It's necessary that you do ensure that you also aware of the implementation and the implications of that bill. What it's also showed us that when it comes to security, we need to call in the experts, and not only the experts outside of an organization, but we need to say that within our environment, in our work environment, between our physical security and our logical security and our risk disciplines, forensics and law, we need to have a concerted approach when it comes to security, and of course, to know who is supposed to do what if something within that security space goes wrong. So you'll hear that I was talking now about convergence versus integration. You'll see a lot of the research if you want to go and read up a little bit more about these disciplines. Some people use the word convergence. Some say it's an integrated approach. Some say it's a holistic approach to security management. But whatever terminology you take, please, it's function over form. It's the whole thing about how do I integrate these two disciplines to make them work best for my particular environment. Now, you might find in some of the bigger companies, what will happen is they'll have a chief security officer, and that both physical and logical security resort there. You might have these two functions feeding into risk management, but the integration of these two concepts do not rely solely on that organizational chart or the scripting of that. If you don't have that in your company, at least know that your policies and your procedures, and specifically your incident response, is geared towards an integration of both these disciplines. And as I said, we're going to talk a little bit more practical about that when I talk specifically about the concepts of access management. Something that I found quite useful is, and this is now when I was putting my information security hat on, and my bag that I carried was my forensics bag. But for me, creating that awareness and understanding within your company to understand, yes, physical security is not just my security guard in the parking lot. It's not just the guy or girl in reception where you sign in. It's not just that system that manages your access card. And when it comes to logical security is not just something that is within the discipline of IT security. People signing in to give access to them, to Windows, to give access to critical financial systems, to let them sign on and log on onto shared folders. If you put all of that in one pot, it, for example, becomes the principles of an integrated access, access management system. So definitely go and analyze and have these conversations within your business to see what is the best approach for you. And also, one of the things that I always say to people, and maybe this is because of my forensic background and that I'm always used to bad things happening, but you should always practice and plan for when things do go wrong. And here, it's very important to give consideration to a risk-based approach. Your organization, how big or how small it is, needs to make a conscious decision across the board on how you are going to react to any breaches, whether it be in the physical or logical, or whether it be in a combined or integrated security space. And what we found very useful is using a risk rating. For example, I know a P5 can be handled by the IT security or the physical security desk and sort it out. As it goes up, a P0 is let's all run away because the world is coming to an end. But we plan for these kind of things. And again, here, I want to stress legislation such as POPIA. And I want to say to you that when it comes to an information security breach, it's going to be very, very important not just to look at physical, at logical or cybersecurity environment, because what if that suspect had been scoping out your environment? What if this person that has deployed ransomware actually was so blasé in visiting some of the insiders that they worked with? If you don't look at your footage, if you don't scan your physical access records, you're never going to know that. Say, for example, there is a breach where you can identify that the point of entry that somebody had into the system was an employee that works in your call center. Now, the IT people are on it. They go and they draw the access records, they go and look, but the physical people from a physical security can go and see, you know what, the person wasn't behind their computer at the stage of commission of these offenses. And instances like that become extremely important to identify the perpetrator. And in a world that we deal with identity theft on a very, very, very regular basis, this is extremely important. I'm just thinking back at some of the cases that I did where the investigators were convinced it was Jackie's user ID and password that was used for this transaction. And I can see Jackie processed this transaction, therefore Jackie must be guilty. And that's what the IT record said to us. But the moment we went and we drew the footage of that specific person allegedly sitting behind the computer, we found nobody there, remote access, or we found a totally different person that came and quickly logged on to Jackie's computer while she went to the bathroom, and she of course forgot to log off. Again here, the contribution from the world of physical security helped us in this case to at least eliminate the person that we thought was actually behind committing this offense, but also helped us to steer our investigation in the correct direction. Now we knew we had a photograph of the person that was actually behind the computer, and we could go and question that person, or we saw that computer had never been switched on that whole day, knowing that maybe we must go and look at somebody that remoted into that desktop, or that that person or the perpetrator found a way to use that user credentials to actually go and perpetrate this offense from a completely different location. One of the things that I always say is, if you want to get investment into any form of security system, you need executive buy-in. They hold the purse strings. And the best way that I've always found to do that is to continuously educate and inform my board or my manager or my executive management of what the specific risks are that we're facing, what the consequences of that risk realizing would be. And this is not only in terms of financial, but also in terms of things like reputational or operational risk. But if your execs understand what you are dealing with and what you are trying to protect, the end result of that is that there's a shift in paradigm, and that security investment is not seen as a grudge purchase, not seen as a grudge payment, but as something that contributes to the overall success of a company. I have been asked on, and I promise you this was a lot of sums to be made. If we take, for example, a cybersecurity risk, and say the breach resulted in a loss of 50,000 to a specific customer. Let's just think about banking and SIM swap fraud. But the reputational risk attached to that, if other customers were to hear of this, or the victim goes off to the media and smears your company's name, that reputational risk is much, much more severe than the 50,000 Rand that the client lost. And it's always interesting when you take the approach, and this is something that I do preach to do, when I do my investigation planning, I usually have a chart that I say the cost of operation, cost of operational risk, compliance risk, reputational risk. And if you are working for a big company and you have had the opportunity to have your brand valued, you might be working maybe on a percentage of that brand and reputational risk, because sometimes I find that if you are able to express that potential loss, for example, against reputation in rands and cents, it does convince people that this expensive system that you're doing is actually not worthless, and it also helps you to quantify the risk that you might be facing. Another way to quantify the risk in the environment that we find, and this is an important tip when it comes to, for example, papaya, is go and look at any fines that might be imposed on your company as a result of a breach taking place. So say, for example, I'm just thinking back to my telco days. There's a provision in RICA that says that if any of the staff of the mobile operator went and abused their position and went and did something with a customer's data, it could expose the company to something like a 5 million Rand fine. So what I did was I usually used that compliance and legal risk also in factoring what the true cost and nature of an investigation is going to be. It's all about security, whether you want to call it physical, whether you want to call it logical, or whether you want to call it holistic security, it still is all about security. Oh, let me just go back. So protecting, detecting, reacting, remediate, respond, and report. What we find here is also interesting to note for those of you that have not dealt with the cybercrimes bill. I mean, even in the cybercrimes bill, there's now provisions that mandates the police to capacitate people to not only investigate cyber-related offenses, but to create that capacity also to detect it. I always say, if we talk about protect, the most important thing that we find these days is information. It's our information about our access card. It is our information about our banking details. It's my information about my password. But also when it comes to protect, we can only protect against what we know. And henceforth, this continuous need to sit together to look at what the threats are within my physical environment versus my logical, and to work together and to see if there's overlaps, because overlaps not only pose the risk of redoing work, but overlaps also pose the opportunity for you to go and look at costing. There might be systems that you can jointly get between these disciplines that might give you a better thing. So there could be cost savings in terms of personnel and in terms of technology that you deploy. Set your systems up to detect. Early detection is one of the best ways to mitigate risk. I've seen in a number of instances, and you know yourself in dealing with physical security, if we are able to detect a perpetrator that tries to enter into our, be it our physical space or into our network space, the earlier we detect, the better the chance of limiting any damages and then react. As I said to you, when we look at react, consider using that risk management, risk rating based approach to say, what is the best approach to this specific type of breach? Who must I involve? Who must I communicate? And that everybody is working from the same space. Remediate. Now, when it comes to remediation, you actually want to say remediate and respond almost in the same word, but you also agree up front. For example, there are some type of threats that I can just close the threat. The IT department can just close and keep a record of it. The physical security can note it in a logbook, but there are certain instances that we know we're going to have to immediately involve the forensic teams or our fraud management teams or whatever. And from the bat, we are going to take the approach of a forensic investigation. Now, it's a bit outside of the scope of this, but also these days, we need to consider that security breaches are usually going to involve some or other type of digital evidence. And digital evidence is fragile, be it my video footage, be it my access log, be it the records and the metadata that I have attached to a certain document. If I stuff it up, I sometimes do not have the opportunity to remediate the same. And even if I do, it creates problems when I eventually have to present this evidence in a court of law, be it a court of law for a criminal prosecution, be it for a civil, be it for the disciplinary. Why? Because I always have to prove the reliability, integrity, and then only the admissibility of that evidence. So definitely always bear in mind that if you deal with digital evidence, see that you get the right people involved and get a forensic view of it, because you don't always get a do-over. Responding to specifically cyber attacks is no longer just an IT function. Because of this integration, and well, let me just stop there. Because ICT permeates through everything that we do, it sort of has, the byproduct of that is that anything IT basically permeates right through the business, and responding and being aware of cyber attacks doesn't any longer just resort under the IT function. And here we see, for example, another byproduct of cyber attacks and intrusions being to know, you have to know what your responsibilities under POPIA is. I always say that if you know what you have to do and how to do it right, the byproduct of that is you're going to be able to identify if something goes wrong, when it goes wrong, and what to do if something happens. Now, I will always remember this one instance where one of the execs said to me, she called my fraud awareness training, thinking Jackie is again teaching us how to think like a criminal. But unfortunately, I actually like the title because, you know, in sales, people say, oh, put yourself in your client's shoes. Think like your client, think what your client would want. Heck yes, I do the same. I think like a criminal. And do I think like a cyber criminal? I do every day. Because if I put myself in their shoes, I can understand well, sometimes, but I can understand why they would go after a certain type of asset that I have, be it an asset in the physical world, be it an asset, for example, the data contained on a system. But I sit and I put myself in my criminal shoes. And maybe that's why I struggle to think that I have to defend criminals and not just prosecute them sometimes. Any questions so far? Okay, let's go to access management. Now, access management is for me the most valuable example that I can give when it comes to an integrated approach to physical and logical security. Because actually, access management does not belong to the world of physical security or to the world of logical or cybersecurity. Access management actually starts in the HR, in the HR department. And why do I say this? Because access management should be defined on a job profile, on your job description. Access management means, and when we take the words from the cybersecurity environment, we apply something called the least privilege principle, which means that you need to only access what you need for the purpose of your specific job and for the function that you want to perform. If we take it to the world of physical security, I need to give access to a certain department, to a person, because of the job that that person is busy performing, or when it comes to a specific computer system, I only allow somebody to access the system if it is needed for their specific job, and I only allow them once they're in that system to perform certain transactions because that is what their job is. So both these two disciplines, when it comes to access management, have their roots in HR management. My apologies if you hear the bell ringing. It's not school, it's somebody ringing my intercom, my physical access measures. And it's also not a Zoom bombing, thank you. Our logical security space is still safe. So when we look at this, we see how important it is to go and take these two disciplines and combine them and take them to the level, for example, of a job description. And the job description, of course, I'm going to have the specific key performance areas from there. And what we used to do with access management is we'd be able to tick off a system and a function based on that to say, you know what, Jackie is employed in this position. She needs to do the following. These systems are needed to perform her job. She's going to need access to this and this department. Bob's your uncle, and forward we go. Any questions on access management? Okay. Now, investigating security breaches, I think throughout my presentation, I have actually been touching on the importance of integrating physical and logical security. And now I'm talking about conducting an investigation. So, as I said to you, my practical experience, when I integrate and I understand the nature and origin of the type of evidence that is produced from a physical environment as well as from my IT environment, it does give me more scope. And it helps me a lot to identify types of evidence that I didn't know about or that I never thought might be able to help me. Now, I'm just thinking at one investigation that we did where a syndicate actually convinced some of the employees in the call centers to give over control or to lend the cyber criminals their passwords. They then accessed the systems, they added more rights to that specific profile, and they were able to transact on the system and access very sensitive information and enrich themselves. Now, what we also found is that we immediately went and drew the physical footage and the access records, and we looked and we saw, but this specific individual, this wasn't their shift. They were not working in the call center at the stage when their system user credentials were used. So we knew immediately, hold on, this might be a more purely type of cyber transaction. But what was also nice is within the call center environment, there was a quality assurance system that actually captured the screens of the people as they were working, so that if there's a client complaint, we could go back to the screen and look at this. And that system's information was also very helpful because it gave us clues as to what was happening. And of course, the cyber criminals never realized that this system was also running. We also then, when we identified the person whose computer was used, we were able to go and look at those physical access records. We were able to subpoena the cell phone records of that specific individual. And in one of the cases, it was quite interesting. The lady that gave her password to the syndicate, she actually, her secondary business was, she augmented her business by selling cookies, and the cyber criminals bought her a stove. So we were able to find the link there and how they convinced her. I mean, some of the other call center agents, their price was a car. Another lady that was also caught out, her price was pay for the education for my child. But again, here we see investigating these type of breaches and the evidence that we find, even just if it is just a cyber incident, don't throw away the evidence that is created within your physical security environment. It calls for both. And as I said, please, please, please don't forget that when you deal with digital evidence, don't venture into that if you are not experienced in gathering digital evidence in a forensically sound manner. Pick up the phone, call your forensic department, or call the outside company that actually assists you in dealing with security breaches. And believe you me, these things are going to become very important next month when Papaya is also up and running fully. And don't forget, Poppy has a brother too, the cybercrimes bill. But with a security or a data breach under Papaya, there is still the supposition that you have to complete a forensic investigation post this incident, because if a data subject comes to you and says, I want to know what happened, I want to know how my data was compromised, you're going to have to give those answers. I hope all of you have already attended your Papaya training as well. Now, to summarize, as I said, it's all about risk management, and it's all about that integrated approach. And there is no more important consideration there if we say that this is something that must be managed from top down. It's a governance issue, because in terms of example, King 4 principles, it now says to the board that when it comes to this world of information and cybersecurity, which this presentation focuses on, but the principle now is that you must apply and explain, not like with King 3 where you could apply or explain, meaning that if something, for example, a security or a data breach happens, the ultimate responsibility and explanation for that comes from a board level. And we also see that because of the modern way in which we're doing business, we need to integrate our security approach. And I ask you when we finish with this lunch and learn to go and think what the impact of working from home is really to you. Yes, it's nice to be able to sit and do a presentation wearing slippers. I would never do that. But has me bringing my work environment into my home compromised my security or vice versa? Go and think just to secure this environment. I mean, when it comes to our homes, we're very focused on the physical security, electric gates, electric fences, and everything. But how secure is the data environments or the ICT environment within our homes? Effective risk management. Remember, I always say when it comes to cyber, it's those people that know they've been a victim, and the other group is the ones that they don't realize they've been the victim. So we need to guard that we are at a level of awareness and continuous awareness so that we can mitigate risk. And especially when it comes to cyber risk in its various forms, it evolves on a daily basis. And I actually advise people to almost treat it continuously as an emerging risk, because you put security measures in place that guard against a specific modus operandi. The next day they change, and maybe your systems are not geared to detect that specific behavior. Terminology and structure, as I said to you, whether your company chooses to join physical and logical security under one structure according to your organizational chart, whether you just have an agreement, whether you have monthly meetings to just share ideas and information, it's not about the structure. It is what is important is the end result. It is that end result of realizing as an organization that we need to integrate the two concepts of physical and logical security. Mostly these days, it's all about information and data. And as much as technology works for our businesses, make technology work for you. See that you employ the right kind of systems, that you set up the right kind of alarms on those systems to detect behavior, and that you get access to tools that will actually help you to investigate and to remediate and to react successfully to any incidents, be it within the logical or in the physical space. I always say that not planning and not having the right tools is a winning recipe for allowing a cyber incident to turn into a cyber disaster. And that is it from me. Any questions?